Hey everyone, Danny here. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is episode number 336. Thank you for taking the time to join me as we continue in our study in the book of Matthew, picking back up where we left off in chapter 14. It says, "At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, 'This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him.'" I'll say here real quick, Herod made the wrong conclusion. His thought about Jesus was the wrong conclusion. And so, in that wrong conclusion, it led him to a wrong place. If he had thought accurately about who Jesus was, if he had come to a right conclusion, then that would lead him to a whole nother place. So this is really it speaks to me for the urgency of why we need to come to right conclusions. So I would ask and pray that each of us come to right and godly conclusions about things and situations and people, so that way we can land in the right place. Verse 3, "For Herod had seized John and bound him, and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people, because they held him to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company and pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, 'Give me the head of John the Baptist, here, on a platter.' And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus." I'll say here also, I can see the importance of being a godly parent. You see the influence that the mother had on the daughter. She had an opportunity. We read elsewhere that he would have given her up to half his kingdom. And so what did the mother prompt her to ask for? Vengeance. And in doing so, the head of John the Baptist. And so she had at the edge of her hand half of a kingdom. But because of bad influence, bad parenting, and ultimately an evil heart, she grabbed something much less than what was available to her. So I see that here, and then also the sins of the mother. We see the daughter, in a sense, outdoes the sin. Not only does she ask for the head, but she asks for it on a platter. So we see oftentimes generationally, and not just in the family, but just even generationally, that the sins of the subsequent generation tend to be more significant than their predecessor generation, with the exception of, a generation that really burns for God's desire and righteousness and holiness. We see that generation following an evil generation to be even worse than before. Verse 13, "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, and said, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." I think about this moment in Peter's life. He did truly the miraculous. He walked on water. I do think, and I've said this before, perhaps Peter could have still walked on the water, given appropriate faith. But I think more likely and most likely, it is because Jesus told him to come. And I think sometimes we get so zealous to see God operate and work in the earth that sometimes we get ahead of him. And in this situation, maybe we step out of the boat, but we don't walk on top of the water. We actually start to sink immediately. Gravity takes over, and it pulls us under. And then we think to ourselves, where was God in our moment? Well, maybe it was because we did not wait on his come, and we would have been empowered to do so like Peter. But instead, we became overzealous and rushed and found ourselves in a bit of a wet spot. Verse 34, "And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent around to all that region and brought to him all who were sick, and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were made well." This again was really a truly remarkable moment, and we see the people of that place full of faith and hope, and realizing that the one before them, Jesus, was able to conquer was conquering over illness and sickness and different infirmities. And so I would hope and pray that each one of us have a fresh realization of who Jesus is and his superiority over sickness and illness and different obstacles in your path, things that you struggle with. Sometimes I was just thinking about this before recording. I listen to quite a number of different ministries via media, and sometimes it's really easy to fall into that trap of thinking, holding these people in such regard because of their ministry and their platform and just how God has used them. And, and I myself, with this podcast, I'm just a person, a regular person with struggles and obstacles and failures and blunders and ways that I should be and I'm not. And so, I have to really check myself as I perceive others in places of in platforms. They are just people who fail, who fall short, and I too am just a person who fails and falls short and wishes I was different in varying ways. And so they and myself and you listening, we all have to just lean into Christ, because where we are weak, He is strong, and where we are insufficient, He is more than enough. And so we thank Him for His goodness and His kindness to us in our stupidity, in our weakness, and in our failures. And we ask for strength to press on, to fight the good fight, to stand against our temptations, even though we may fall time after time, that we still stand against them and lean into Christ for strength and encouragement. And we are all just people, regular people, living life, trying our best, and in some cases, not trying our best, living below our best. But the grace of God is sufficient, and He is eager and willing to step in and transform our lives. I was just talking to a listener. Shout out to Andrew. He encouraged me the other day, because of how God really helped him to navigate a very difficult time in his life. And there's countless stories of how we all struggle in particular ways and in particular situations and circumstances, and we fail over and over and over. But it makes God's kindness and grace that much sweeter, because He is not tired of us, and though He wants us to live righteous and holy and blameless, He is also well aware of our insufficiency, and yet saves us anyways, loves us anyways. And so I would just encourage you to keep in mind that we are all just people, and we are all imperfect. And so be sure and show others the grace that you wish to be shown to you. And in doing so, we can all be shaped and molded more into the image of Christ and see His kingdom come upon the earth to all who call upon His name. So thank you so much for being with me on this episode. I pray it's a blessing, and look forward to the next episode. God bless.